Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Canyon. Welcome back to a confluence. Two things. I have said it in the past. I'll say it again in the future. I mean it every time. More oft than not. One person asking is enough. That leads us into the tech note that we're going to do today, which is computing thy FDR, computing your final drive ratio. Now, arithmetic warning. You will have to use mostly multiplication and division, little addition and subtraction. A calculator is handy. If you own a phone, you have one. If you have giant fingers, you go on Amazon and you get an Osalo. Look at the size of that. Like, who else is using this? I feel like this was a calculator specifically made for me. When somebody said, I don't understand final drive ratio, I sat here and I said, you just take numbers and you mash them together, and then you end up where you are. And that is that is why I am not an educator. That is why I'm not an instructor. And we're going to do our very best right now to pretend that I'm not. Because when someone said, can you show us how to compute FDR? The very, very first thing I thought was obviously Legos. So we have our visual representation. Look at this. He's got universals and everything. And the driver is in the front so that we can tell from the front from the rear. We have an approximation, a very simplified version of a 3-gear gearbox, because in Lego, God bless them, we have a limited number of gearing options. So they are basically incremental. Starting over here, this would be our pinion. This is an 8-tooth gear, and it is meshing with what would be the spur gear, which is a 40-tooth. And I think most of us here can do the math on that. You would have a spur to pinion ratio of 5-to-1. For every 5 revolutions of the pinion, the spur turns once. It's 5-to-1. This is why pinions wear out. A metal pinion will wear out faster than plastic spur, because its teeth are getting used up 5 times as fast. We go to the inside of what would be the 3-gear, which for our purposes is the outside. That way you can see it. There is generally a top shaft gear. This is the side shaft gear because it's laying down. Listen, I threw this together out of Legos in about 15 minutes, so give me a break here. Let's not also talk about how the axles are offset. We will indeed, in moments, talk about why the axles are offset. That 40 feeds through to a 24-tooth. The size of that is not particularly significant, though in many, many, many gearboxes, this would be a 20-tooth. I'd love to fit a 20-tooth there. This is basically to perform the internal reduction. Some of the little tiny gearboxes you see will omit one of the gears, like the top shaft will just drive what we will call the output gear, the diff gear, as it were, if a diff were present. So we have a 24 driving a 24. If you divide 24 into 24, what do you have? 1. So you would take the 5-to-1 on the external, the spur to pinion ratio, you would multiply it by 1. Anything times 1 is itself. 5-to-1 times 1 is 5-to-1. We then have a 24 feeding a 40. 24/40 is 1.66666666666 infinitely repeating. Just go to the second place, round it up. If it's 1.6666666, this is what we do. We go in here, we go 40 divided by 24. 1.66666. So when you write it down, you write down 1.67. 1.67 times 5 is 8.35-to-1. So this gearbox, as it were, this collection of meshing cogs, has an output ratio of 8.35-to-1. Meaning 8, and let's be even rounder, 8 1/3 revolutions of your motor equates to 1 revolution of the output shaft. We're not going to muddy things up by talking about gearboxes that have internal underdrive, overdrive just yet. They are computed the same way when we get there. So we've got a front ring and pinion, and we have a rear ring and pinion. The rear ring and pinion has an 8-tooth input. That should seem fairly familiar. It's the same gear that's over here. Turning a, yes, you guessed it, 24-tooth gear. The only difference being that these are basically designed for a ring and pinion operation. They're not high pinion, they're center pinion on Lego gears. That is 3-to-1 in the rear. And then the reason that our axles are offset is because in the front, we have a 16-tooth driving a 24-tooth. Again, you divide 16 into 24. It goes in 1.5 times. So this vehicle would have 50% overdrive to, wait, no, I'm sorry. That's 100% overdrive to the front. And you can go above 100% in terms of overdrive and underdrive, which would make you go, what? But because of the way you can split gears in actual axles, you can have the front end make more than one full revolution before this makes a full revolution. So that's over 100%. The front, in this operation, the front axle is spinning at twice the speed of the rear axle. That is a lot easier to demonstrate when I tell you a thing that maybe you didn't know, which is this gear right here is a little Lego gear. This is that 8-tooth Lego gear. Sadly, I don't have a companion 8-tooth, but I do have a 12-tooth. And you'd say, where did you get a 12-tooth? Well, Lego gears, these gears right here, are Module 1. So you get yourself an adapter and you get a Mod 1 12-tooth and you mount it up to a motor right there. And we didn't even really tighten the mount down so the motor can wiggle around a little. But we're not gonna dump a lot of torque into our buddy here. We just want to show you it going. So it's going a little fast. Let's get to it. All right. I mean, I think you can see fast, not very fast. This is the basics of what you've got. You will also notice the ring is closer to me in the front, and the ring is opposite to me in the rear. If you flip that ring around, you've now run a reverse gear, and the axles will be rotating in opposite directions. So we have 8.35 exiting at the gearbox. We have a minor reduction in the front of 1.5 to 1. So this is really not crawling approved. We would want a bit more gear reduction than this in our mythical suspensionless Lego crawler. We have a 12.5 to 1 ratio in the front and a 25 to 1 ratio in the rear, which is exactly double the reduction in the rear. So this is indeed set up. This is all overdrive because the axle is not changing the speed of the output. Basically, if we had gone smaller than 8 in the rear or bigger than 24 on that one, that would be rear underdrive. In gearbox, because this is important. In computing a final drive ratio, this is important. If you're not running overdrive or underdrive in any spot, whether it be inside our gearbox, which we're not running here because we're running a single output, it just comes out and it just comes out in a single straight line, easier to see like this. You will typically see gearboxes that have overdrive or underdrive percentages output from the gearbox. With the exception of the Mi-S gearbox and the Stealth X, they will tend to be offset outputs. Because instead of this shaft coming directly off the 40, they would have it come off of an intermediate gear. Regardless, to do the math, even if you have a gearbox like a Stealth X that has 2 gears on the inside of it, so for a gross exaggeration of the process, let us say that instead of it feeding this gear, it feeds a mechanism like this, and these 2 gears are not attached. There are 2 other gears to drive them. So one output has a smaller gear than the other. If that is the case, if whatever gearbox you have has 2 different outputs, you just need to know your tooth counts, and you treat them as completely independent, because there will be an input gear of a given size, and then there will be 2 gears meshing, generally, like in the case of a Stealth X, 2 gears meshing for the front and 2 gears meshing for the rear. In the case of Element, it is a 2852 in the front, and then only the rear gears change. They go up and down. So you go 2753, you go 2654, you go 2555, and the bigger the output gear gets, the closer the ratio gets, the more underdrive you have. The Stealth X, the Mias, the OD3, those are underdrive gearboxes. They are actually feeding an output to the rear that is slower than the output that they're feeding to the front. Some gearboxes, the 10 Pro gearbox, actually speeds up the front. So does the Vanquish in a VFD Twin. They actually speed up the front. So it's not, it seems daunting, right? Or it can, but it's not. Because typically, most any axle that you're running, which you're looking at, this is reasonably close. You'll be typically looking at an 8-tooth input gear and a 30-tooth output gear, which is 3.75 to 1. This treats virtually all of the axial axles, not including the Ghoulie Moo, not including old things like Wraiths and Bombers, AR-60 stuff. But if you're on AR-44 and newer from axial, it is most likely beginning with 3.75 to 1. So if we were gonna draw up a mythological gear setup, if I can find my. So let's say that we'll start with we'll use a Stealth X because I know the numbers. By default, they come with an 18-tooth pinion and an 87-tooth spur, which is, why am I setting this on a wheel? Which is 4.83 infinitely repeating, so 4.84 to 1. That is the spur to pinion ratio. It has an internal ratio of 2.6 to 1 because inside that gearbox you have 3 meshing gears. Look, I made a snowman. You have a 20 into a 28 into a 52. And you might go, oh no, you've introduced too many numbers. Well, so the top of the gearbox, 2028 is 1.4, and then 52 divided by 28 is 1.9, and then you take 1.9 and you times it by 1.4, and you get 2.67. So it's actually a little more, 2.67 to 1. So that is our internal ratio. This is our external ratio, 2.67 times 4.84, 12.93 to 1. And that is your output. And they want a big reduction out of that gearbox because your reduction at the axle is only 3.75 to 1, which gives you a 48.5 to 1 final. I feel like 2852. I might be misremembering the 20. Because I'm pretty sure that the final output on a Stealth X is right around 45. And see, this is what can happen. Get your numbers and write them down. They made me go to the internet because I've just been doing calculations on gearboxes with what is stated in the manual, which is that the internal reduction of a Stealth X gearbox is 2.6 to 1, and it's not, because no matter the we're gonna harp on Stealth X for a minute. No matter the configuration, regardless of what your spur and pinion are out on the outside, inside the gearbox, a 20 feeds a 28, which feeds a 52. And if you do the math on that, that's 2.67 to 1. 2.67 to 1, when speaking about internal reduction, is significant compared to just 2.6 to 1. Now, as I did mention, so like in the instance of the 12% underdrive, this just changes to 26 and 54, right? So there's actually, inside of a Stealth X, there's actually 5 gears. So computing this is not a problem. It's the same thing. It's 26 divided by 20, which instead of 1.4 is now 1.3. and then you have 54 divided by 26, which is 2.08. So we'll go to 2.1. 2.1 times 1.3 is 2.73. Yeah, that's 10. That's 10%. They claim it's 12. This is you've opened a can of worms. You've gone down a rabbit hole. Much as how when the Phoenix was released with the VFD Twin, they said that it had selectable overdrive between 6.5% and 33%. It's actually around 46.5%. If the book says it, don't trust it. Do your math. Do your math. Because 48.5 to 1. Portals are going to add a whole nother thing. Typically in an axial portal, you're looking at a 12 to 23, another 1.9 to 1 reduction, which compared to a 3.75 out of a straight axle, adding that 1.9 basically doubles your gear reduction. So if you replace the element axle in question here, we'll do a 3.75 times 1.9. So we've replaced this 3.75 straight, you can barely read that, with a 7.125 portal. You can see that you very nearly doubled the gear reduction. So if we take the 12.93 output from the gearbox and we take that against the 7.125 portal, you now have a 92.1 to 1 final. So not quite double, but it is a significant amount. Vanquish portals start at 2028, which is 1.4, not as big of a reduction. Traxxas portals start at 923, which is 2.55 to 1 on the reduction. So you will go over. So if you put the waters, they get muddy. So Traxxas doesn't run an 830, they run an 1134. I told you there was going to be math. That is a 3.1 reduction at the ring and pinion instead of a 3.75. Nevertheless, the 3.1 times the 2.55 in the middle is 7.9 to 1. So if we take 7.9 and we multiply that by the original 12.93, a Stealth X with stock, ordered them off of Jenny's TRX4 axles, is 102 to 1. And then you're saying, okay, all right, okay, I get what you're saying. You're saying that I've got a variety of vehicles. I've got a vehicle that has a 50 to 1 final drive ratio with no underdrive or overdrive split. It's just same amount of power to the front and rear axles, 50 to 1. What do I do with this knowledge? Well, a rule of thumb, and this is the rule of thumb by which I operate, is for pure crawling purposes, what we're going to do is we're going to keep it pretty simple for this, as simple as I can, because I'm going to throw numbers at you right now. Okay, we're going to use 3 things as an example, though we really only need to use 1. I'm gonna operate off of a basis of fusion, of Hobbywing Fusion's 1200, 1800, and 2300 kV output. Okay, what does that kV output mean? 2300 kV means that motor will revolve 2,300 times per minute per volt of input. So for that we will use 3S, and we will use 3S full boat, fully charged, which is what you'll see for about a millisecond after plugging in, and the voltage will start to dip. So that is operating off of 12.6 volts. If you multiply 2300 by 12.6, you get 28,980. 1800 is 22,680, and 1200 is 15,120. Do you see how the top one is almost, but not quite, double the first one? That's because it's double the kV. So it's going to turn twice as fast. Fusions are nice because they give us, and outrunners as well, because they give us this ability to maintain the low speed control while keeping RPM. There's a reason I don't fit Fusion Pros to everything. I don't tend to need all of that RPM because all other things we intend to be equal. I want to gear all of my vehicles to work at what I call the wide open throttle speed, which should be just faster than a walking pace. I shoot for something around 4 miles an hour, approximately 4 miles an hour. What is that in European? 6.5? About 6.5 kph, let's say, give or take. Well, how do you compute that? I'll tell you right now. So, let's go with the 1200. 15,120 RPM. 15,120. I've never gotten used to the zero should be right there with the period. But the period should, anyway, 15,120. If you do not have a lot of gear reduction, if you have something like an Element, an AR-44 axled, you're going to be looking at about that 50-to-1 output. So we're going to divide that by 50. That is going to give us 302.4. What does 302.4 mean? 302.4 means that if this thing was cranked wide open, 1200 kV on 3S, this output of the axle right here is rotating 302.5 times per minute based on a 1200 kV motor and full 3S battery and the gear reduction that we sort of talked about. What did we come out with? 48 and change? We're going to call it 50-to-1 because you do have the spur and pinion to play with that. Regardless, 302-to-1. What do I do from there? You're going to need to know the thing called your rollout. For the purposes of this, I took a deep woods. You don't need anything fancy. You know what you need? You need the primordial calculator. You need a ruler. Pick a spot on the ruler. Set your wheel down. I'm going with the D in deep woods right here, which is out of frame. I'm going to roll it all the way around until the D comes around again. I'm going to look at the mark. It is at close enough to approximate. If you have a flexible fabric tape measure, it'll be even better. Close enough as to approximate 355 millimeters. So we're going to times that by 355. That's going to give us a huge number, 107,352. We're going to divide that by 1,000, which is going to give us 107.35. What the hell does 107.35 mean, you ask? That means that this tire on our theoretical Stealth X setup with a 1200 kV motor running on 3S, this motor will cover 107.35 meters per minute. 107.35, which is, conveniently enough, 4.00 miles per hour. And the computation is exactly the same for all of them. If it's 2,300, so we would then also, if you know the 1,200, you can literally, so that's 107, keep 107.35 in mind. 2,300 divided by 1,200 is a 1.92, which is, I should have known that, 1223, that's a portal ratio. So we multiply 107.35 times 1.92, and we get 206 meters a minute, or approximately, which is 7.68 miles an hour. So if you take that exact same setup, remove the 1,200, put a 2,300 in it, instead of going 4 miles an hour, you're going to go 7.68. And that is the theory. I always like to use the highest voltage because then we're getting a theoretical maximum. Again, it's the same thing gearing for trailing. Get a number that you want and find your way there. This is why doing something like changing a tire, let's change the tire. Now we've removed the deep woods and we're going to put an RC 4-wheel drive class 1 scrambler on the vehicle. This is why big changes, and this would be considered a big change. The rollout on this is, basically 310. And we get 93.7 meters a minute, which is right at 3.5 miles an hour. Now you could say, I mean, from 4 to 3.5 is not a huge jump. Well, it kind of is. That is a speed reduction of, how many halves is that? 1/8. So that is 12% slower simply by reducing the size of the tire. And it works the same the other way. If you go to a 5 1/4, if you go to a 5.75, it's one of the things that makes, little side note, it's one of the things that makes tire testing here kind of difficult, because you have to have a rig set up to test basically that size of tire, because the size of the tire is part of the gear ratio, because it is just, you're putting a bigger or a smaller gear on at the end. This is just another gear in the gear train. So what I hope for are questions. If there's anything that I didn't cover, and I'm sure that there isn't, I think if you have one takeaway, it's that Lego gears are mod 1, but Lego gears are not really set up to mesh with a 540 motor. I've heard crawlers louder than this. That's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. If you have any questions, please do put them in the comments below. This is one of those things where it's just there inside me. My takeaways, who doesn't love this? And element, it's not 2.6 to 1, it's 2.67 to 1, and it's very 20, 28, 52 is very simple math. You will get, do your math on your 3 gears, because whatever they claim that it is, it probably isn't. Traxxas Magnum is. It comes out to like, well, I mean, there's a couple more decimal points on it, you know, from the 2-wheel drive stuff, but it is a 2 point, they call it the Magnum 2.72, and it does have an internal reduction of 2.72 to 1, which is a thing that I could be mad about and go on a rant about, as in, why do they keep giving us less and less gear reduction? It's not that hard. Gear reduction is free mechanical advantage. Why would you want to run 100 to 1 instead of 50 to 1? Because then your drag brake has to work half as hard, because you have all the reduction of the gears. Like, will this pop apart if I try to pick it up? Yeah. Actually pops out of mesh. We don't have a very good mesh on the pinion. I probably should have gone to a 13. It's not terrible. That's quieter. That's nice. So, if you have any gearing questions, anything related, go ahead. Drop it in the comments below. If one person asks, it's usually enough. Find your speed, count your teeths, get out your calculator, and then you don't have to buy buckets and buckets of pinions. Particularly if you've just done a build and you don't know what you want to do for motor. If you know the parts that you're theoretically going to use, you write the things down, and then you start to remember them, that a TRX4 axle is a 7.9 to 1 output, and that an axial portal is a 7.1, and that most Air 44s, Air 45s are 3.75, and then you get your gearbox, and you determine the ratio. Don't just go by a gearing chart. Sometimes I'm not sure what math they're using. We're just using basic arithmetic. We don't even do fractions. The most we do is we Americanize the living hell out of it, and we intermingle imperial and metric measurements together to the confusion of everyone except the Americans. So thank you for joining me for this little, whatever this was. Hopefully some explanation of how to determine what your final drive ratio is to save money on the parts that you're eventually going to buy. That's all I have. I could tear the whole thing down, but I hope to see you in the next one. And in between now and then, please one and all do your very best. Have a good one, everybody. We'll see you again here from the canyon, hopefully real soon. He's wearing a... I couldn't find a racing helmet in the bins, so I just went with something that looked like it would be safe. Gear ratio, math can be fun if it saves you money.